Awesome, awesome. Hey, Amina, and also hi, Leah.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi, Amina.
Thank you so much for joining us. We'll get started in just 1 minute. Yeah, hey. um, yeah.
Did y'all get the thingy that said we're recording now? Hi, Leah. Did y'all get that message that said we're recording now? I just want to double check that it was
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right. All right. So it is 6:33. So I say we go ahead and get started so we have enough time at the end for questions. Once again, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. If you do not know, my name is Leah Trotman, and I'm a senior at Agnes Scott, and also a third-year tutor in the Center for Writing and Speaking. We're all wearing our lovely t-shirts today. Tonight, I'm joined by my wonderful, lovely fellow members of the workshop committee who will get the opportunity to introduce themselves later this evening. We are so excited to have you here for the kickoff of PRESS, which stands for Persuasive, Relevant, Effective Speaking Strategies, which is a two-part workshop series focused on building public speaking skills across academic, formal, and informal spaces. Today, in part one of the workshop series, we will help you develop academic presentation skills such as persuasive speech, how to target an audience, and how to effectively use clear visual aids within a presentation. So, if you are participating in any upcoming academic conferences, we know Spark is just around the corner. If you're participating in any senior thesis presentations, end of the semester presentations, or truly any other upcoming speaking opportunity, you are in the right place. So, welcome. I'm going to now quickly hand it over to Caitlin, my fellow workshop committee co-chair, to begin introductions of the team.
Hi, everybody. My name is Caitlin, and I am the co-chair of the workshop committee. Yay. Looking forward to chatting with y'all tonight.
Hi, y'all. We can, I guess, go on the order that we are there to avoid any confusion. My name is Ren. I am a senior international relations and gender studies double major, second year tutor. Really excited to get into it today.
Hi, I'm Drasana. I'm a junior, second year tutor, psychology major. I'm excited to work with you guys.
Felicia is here in spirit.
Oh, and
Yeah.
Thank you, Maris.
I would just go ahead and say it. She's an awesome committee member, just like the rest of them. My name is Amaris Sawyer, class of 22, and a second year tutor in the CWS. Glad to be here tonight.
Thank you, Amaris. And of course, we also have on the screen our lovely CWS coordinator, Imani Young Bay, and also our lovely CWS director, Dr. Mina Ivanova. I'm sure many of you have seen tons of email from those two in the past year and a half. So we love them, and we wanted to shout them out today as well. All right, so as we get started, it has become a tradition of ours to start each of our workshops with an interactive Zoom exercise. So if you are able, go ahead and place your cursor over and click the reactions button at the bottom right of your screen. I hope you guys can find it. But yeah, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see like security, participants, chat. On the right, you'll see reactions. Go ahead and click on that, and then you'll see all of the reactions that we're going to use today for this interactive Zoom exercise. Yeah. All right, so go ahead and just keep that up as we do the activity too. All right, so question one. On a scale of predetermined Zoom functions, which you will see on your screen, rate your presentation efficacy. How well do you feel you present? And I'll just run through very quickly what these emotions mean. So the shock face, like the, oh my God, is a big yikes. You feel like you can't really give any presentations without major anxiety, or feel like you're forgetting why you are up there in the first place. So you're kind of like, who put me up here? The heart is, okay, my presentation skills need some loving, but I do feel like I can stand up and give a coherent presentation, but maybe my visuals need some work, or perhaps you struggle to engage your audience throughout the full presentation. And then the confetti is, as we always say, you're in your bag, right? Your presentation skills are superb. There isn't much you think you need to change, and you can manage your anxiety. You are able to provide compelling analysis throughout your presentation. And of course, as we have today, shout out to Caitlin, you have gorgeous visual aids. Okay, so I think I saw a heart from Amina. Leah, do you know a heart as well? Great. Okay. Oh, thank you, Ren. Tutors, how y'all feeling? Y'all can go ahead, chime in, put your little reactions as well. Yeah, I definitely also, I'm in the middle, heart / confetti. Some days I feel like I'm in my bag. Other days we could use some work. Okay, that's great. That's totally fine. We're gonna work on a lot of these issues today within the presentation. And actually part 2 of the workshop series deals with handling tackling major anxiety. So please do come back for that as well. Okay, the second question, go ahead and get your reactions up as well. What are your major presentation concerns? So for this question, we've kind of grouped already some of the concerns to make it easier for you. But if you have any other major presentation concerns, go ahead and just drop them in the chat, and we can also attempt to tackle them. So the thumbs up if you feel like you struggle with managing anxiety before or during presentations. The clapping if you feel like you struggle with maintaining an audience throughout the presentation. Confetti if you feel like you struggle with identifying what are the main parts of a presentation or like the main parts of your research to put into a presentation. And then lastly, the heart if you feel like you struggle a bit with building an engaging introduction or a meaningful conclusion. So go ahead and pull up some of those main things. Okay, Leah. All right. Absolutely. Managing anxiety before and during a presentation. And Amina as well. Yeah. That's totally okay. We're going to touch on that in the upcoming workshop as well. So please do come back. We would love to have you, and we can have a much more full and round discussion about those presentation concerns too. Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that you'll hear from Ren, who's leading that session in part 2, is that one of the biggest ways to handle and manage our anxiety beforehand is to come prepared, which is exactly what we're going to focus on today in the majority of this workshop. So you are in the right place. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. All right, so moving on to the next slide. Before I hand this workshop over to Caitlin to kick things off, I wanted to go ahead and drop a resource in the chat. So give me a thumbs up once I drop it in there. Oh, and Caitlin, can you go ahead and read that out loud while I think Leah just dropped something in the chat as well.
Sure. While Leah kind of drops the resource in the chat, we just want to let you know that our presentation will follow the structure of the handout. So it's broken into 4 different sections. The first is engaging introductions and establishing credibility as a speaker. The second one is about narrowing down your research. The third section is about maintaining an audience. And the final section is about conclusions. Feel free to download this resource and use it for all of your other presentations. It's a really good way to kind of get your thoughts organized, and also just to remember some of the main points that we talk about in the presentation. So save a copy, but also feel free to take notes on that worksheet presentation.
I'm cutting out for you guys.
Yeah.
Okay, that's totally fine. Let's, Katie, can you hear us again? I think you were cutting out a little bit. Yeah, okay. That's totally fine. No, I can do a little brief synopsis. So essentially we built this worksheet to aim to help you in crafting your own presentations outside of the workshop. Originally, if we were in person, we would have asked you to arrive with ideas, right, for an upcoming presentation. And then together we would have crafted a little presentation in the workshop. But obviously we're all Zoom fatigued. We know we're all tired. But we still wanted to share this resource with you, which is now in the chat. So that way you can still get a chance to work with the resource, feel comfortable. And then when you begin to develop your presentations outside of the workshop, you will have this resource ready and available to you with the notes you already took in the workshop from this presentation. Okay, and I want to, before I hand it over, Caitlin, just to acknowledge that Leah typed something in the chat. So I'll go ahead and read it out really briefly. So Leah says, I have a general anxiety disorder, so I'm anxious all the time, but I get major presentation anxiety, testing anxiety, even while I'm well prepared and studied and what I need to know and say. Thank you so much, first of all, Leah, for sharing that. We completely recognize that was like a really big thing for you to acknowledge. And we will touch on that as well in the upcoming workshop too. So we have plenty of other strategies, even outside of being prepared, that we will most definitely share with you too. Yeah, okay. Caitlin, all yours.
Okay, y'all give me 1 second. I want to make sure that I don't cut out on you again, so I'm gonna do a little 1 second, okay?
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. No rush. And if you want one of us to handle the slides too, just let us know and we can.
Okay, I gotcha. All right, so the first thing that we're going to talk about today is creating engaging introductions and establishing your credibility as a speaker. Of course, this would have been presented by Felicia, who's not with us tonight, but no worries, the information is still here and we're going to go over it today. So looking at that worksheet that Leah dropped in the chat, we're going to first talk about, as I said earlier, engaging introductions and establishing credibility. And all of that begins with identifying who your audience is. As a presenter, you should always ask yourself, who is the audience? Even though most of the time we give presentations in classrooms, right? But a lot of times to determine who the audience is, you can go a bit deeper than just, oh, it's my class, and kind of looking at some other identifying factors. The first thing you can look at is occupation. Are they professors, mostly students, researchers, stakeholders, potential employers? What is the median age? Are there cultural background and values that are in common? Gender, level of education, political affiliation, all of these things can help you narrow down what your audience might be looking for, what they think might be important when you're trying to form an engaging introduction and establish your credibility. So considering all of these different factors will help you select what is the most meaningful thing going to be for me to really get this presentation off to a good start. So now we're going to talk about just grabbing their attention, right? Having an engaging introduction is really critical when you're presenting, because whether it's a formal or an informal presentation, this is when the audience decides whether they are going to listen to you for the whole time or not. So when you are preparing the presentation, you want to kind of get a attention grabber or a hook, some people call it a hook, to help capture the attention of your audience at the very beginning. And there are different types of hooks and attention getters that you can choose from. I mean, you can use statistics, quotations, questions, rhetorical questions. Some people use silence, which is really cool, maybe for something a little more abstract. You can use humor. Lots of people love to tell jokes, personal stories, or referring to a historical or a current event. Each kind of hook sets a different tone for the presentation. So you want to make sure that you choose the one that is most appropriate for your audience and the location that you're in. So to give you an example, if you were giving a course pitch for your entrepreneurship course, maybe you would want to start with citing a statistic about the success rate of women-only gyms. Or if you were talking about different kinds of feminism, maybe you would want to start by quoting the definition of womanism by Alice Walker. Or, you know, if you are giving a commencement speech, which is coming up really soon, everybody, you may want to start with a personal story. Those types of things are different. The introduction that you choose will have to work for your audience. Additionally, utilizing different tones and gestures or stances or natural movements, whether you use your hands or not, can also kind of help amplify the type of attention grabber or hook that you choose to use in your introduction. So once you're able to grab the audience's attention, you will have the best opportunity of keeping them engaged for the rest of your presentation, which is the most important thing. So after you get your audience's attention, it's important to kind of talk about what it is that you're going to talk about, right? You want to say, this is kind of where we're starting today, and disclose the topic of your presentation. A really good way to do that when you're presenting research is to start with your research question, or some of the questions that you asked yourself when you were preparing for this presentation or this TED Talk or whatever. And doing that early on kind of helps the audience understand why you are presenting and what your presentation will entail. Also, you want to include how you got to those questions and provide some relevant background information and understanding of your topic. And what this will really help you do is make sure all of this is very clear and very focused. You want to make sure that your audience knows why we're here, what we're going to be talking about, so we don't feel like our time is going to be wasted, or the audience doesn't have to wonder what's going on. After that, you want to talk specifically about the literature that's out there. We call this a mini literature review. And the literature review is really just an overview of the scholarly sources about your specific topic. And so showing others or sharing other scholars' work in your field as a reference serves as a way to incite and add more information on your own topic. And so when you review the works of other scholars, that's often when you realize that there are significant gaps in research that need to be filled. And so that that's a lot of times where we kind of get our own start with a research project, but it's a really good way to kind of ease your audience into where your contributions are coming from. And so conveying this little miniature review conveys to your audience that you are able to comprehend and contribute to a really wide body of scholarly literature. And that helps to build your credibility to the audience that you're presenting to. Okay, so now that we're talking about credibility, a couple of ways that you can do that. Eye contact. On Zoom, this is a little different. So if I wanted to make eye contact with you, of course, I would look into the camera. But if you're in person, you can look, in the eyes of the people. If that freaks you out, you can look, right over their heads or out their noses or something that's not directly in their face. But doing that, especially in an American context, indicates that you're not really afraid and you believe that, I know what I'm talking about and I know what I'm saying. Your attire also suggests that maybe you fit in with the audience, you want to match their style, or you want to elevate your style. Just generally the way you physically present yourself is going to be something that people take notice of when they're watching your presentation. And the last thing we have on here is tone, a consistent and clear tone that conveys that you're confident, you know what you're talking about. In the American cultural context, a lot of times this means we're kind of loud. We tell people to project a lot. That's not the case in every cultural context, but that is something that we kind of advise you to do, especially in the virtual environment where, as you saw earlier, the microphones go in and out, right? You want to make sure that everyone can kind of understand what it is that you're saying. Okay, and the last thing I really want to reiterate is explaining your relationship to the research. Why you are competent to speak on your topic will really kind of help to solidify your credibility. If your audience says, oh, this person knows what they're talking about and they have my attention, you are most likely going to keep that engagement for the rest of your presentation. Okay, now that worksheet that Leah dropped in the chat includes a space for you to outline your presentation. So I'm just going to recap the main points so you can double check that you have all of these things we talked about in this space. Okay, so in order to create an engaging introduction, you want to first consider who your audience is. Then you want to use a hook or attention getter like a statistic. Then you want to state your research question and share your scholarly sources, a literature review or historiography if you're in the history field. After that, to establish your credibility as a speaker, you want to be mindful of how you look, how you act in front of the audience, and how you explain your relationship to the research. Okay, that is enough for me for this workshop right now. I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Amaris, who is going to talk a little bit more about actually picking the right things for the content, the main meat of your presentation. So Amaris, take it away.
All right, thank you, Caitlin. And as Caitlin stated earlier, I just want to remind you all to remember to take notes in the respective spaces on your worksheet. Now that Caitlin has offered some strategies on how to develop an engaging introduction and establish our credibility, let's discuss how to select the main points of evidence and put them into our presentation. So in outlining your thesis, you are essentially entering your voice into the larger discourse surrounding your topic. Those gaps in your research that you discussed in your literature review can help you decipher what approach to take when entering into the larger discourse surrounding your topic. Consider how exactly you contribute, what are your contributions, and how do they complement the existing research? And then what larger implications does your argument have? Who or what is impacted? These questions will not only help you decide how to insert your own voice, but also provide you with the actual content within your thesis outline. Following outlining your thesis, your next goal is to share the major findings of your research and their following implications. Major findings of your research are those findings that relate directly to your thesis and main ideas. To ensure that you cover all major findings and important ties to your argument, consider a roadmap for yourself. Think about how your research findings complement one another and your larger argument to essentially tell your audience the rationale for the conclusions you've drawn. In attempts to decide which parts of your research are the major findings, consider some of the following questions. What evidence was found to support my thesis? What evidence was found that refutes my thesis? And how does my research help fill the gaps I noticed in my lit review? In some cases, you may not be able to answer all of these questions. When that happens, be sure to choose maybe one or two. You may choose a way in which your evidence kind of supported your thesis, in a way that it kind of refuted your thesis to just give yourself credibility across the board. Ultimately, though, these 3 questions will help you decipher what specifically about your research you should share. Keep going. Sorry, Leah. So as Caitlin stated earlier in the presentation, we are not only responsible for grabbing our audience's attention in the beginning, but also maintaining that audience, which Rin will talk about more in just a bit. We often have to give presentations to different professionals, a group of students who may be familiar or even unfamiliar with our topic. It varies. And in those cases, you may want to develop some of the questions that I presented in the last slide to kind of get the audience perspective involved. What evidence that supported my thesis is most relatable to my audience? How may the evidence that did not support my thesis impact the community I'm presenting to? Are there any trigger warnings I should be aware of? How does this affect which major findings you decide to share? Being at Agnes, that is a very important thing I want to bring out. Be sure to know who you talk to make sure you're not offending anyone or any group of people, okay? So now that we've discussed how to find our major findings in our research, let's talk about how we kind of provide analysis for those major findings. In disseminating your analysis, you are once again contributing to establishing the importance of your thesis and your research. Thoroughly share with your audience how and why your major findings complement or do not complement your thesis. To begin your analysis, be sure to make a clear indication that these are your words and not those of the source or the author. You can use phrases like the 2005 study suggests, my research implies, I found that, excuse me. These phrases will ultimately help you get in the mindset of analyzing rather than summarizing your sources, which is what we need you to do here. Ultimately, what your responsibility is in disseminating your analysis is talking about whether or not your thesis is valid or not. How does your major findings show that, and tell us like how and in what ways. All right, so something else that we have to consider when presenting is that we are talking at a group of people. So we may have a bunch of information that our audience may not be able to keep up with throughout the presentation. In that case, it's best to use visuals such as graphs, charts, photos, and other diagrams to organize your thoughts and effectively disseminate your analysis. If you are analyzing a major statistical finding, this is a place to show your audience graphs and charts that organize your stats in a coherent manner. While there may be several options for graphs and charts, which I'm sure you all have seen on like Google Drive and other platforms, you definitely want to pick one that shows the breadth of the data that you want to portray and is also readable, which is very important, okay? A few things to consider when you have these diagrams and different charts: give titles and captions to all visual aids. Be sure to label all axes on charts and graphs, highlight, circle, zoom in on important data points, and then always check to see if numbers or important captions are large enough to see on the screen, okay? In addition to your charts, diagrams, and photos being visually appealing and legible, they should also be relevant to your research topic. For example, I may be doing a presentation on the extinction of elephants, right? And with that, my supporting visual may be a chart or a graph that shows the number of elephants that have been extinct between the years of 2000 and 2015. However, I know that in the years 2004 and in 2009, those were the years where there was the highest extinction level. So I want to hone in on those dates. In that case, you may want to circle, zoom in on, or highlight those specific data points for 2004 and 2009. Again, it's the small things that make sure, you know, our audience is in the loop throughout the presentation. Last tip for disseminating analysis with the use of visuals. Can you go back, Leah? Sorry about that. It can oftentimes be a good idea to use diagrams with arrows or a cycle to show cyclical, relational, or causal relationships between our major findings and our analysis. This is a way that you can establish continuity and progression between your major findings and your analysis. And again, there are several ways, but just make sure whatever visual that you choose is legible, organized, and relevant, of course. Lastly, when analyzing our major findings, it can be easy to ramble and go off topic. So in that case, you may want to limit yourself to no more than 2 or 3 sentences when articulating your major finding and your analysis, of course. So I have an example here. Our topic is the effectiveness on cold water on growing ferns. Major finding is that it was discovered by the students at the University of Vermont that it is best to use room temperature water opposed to cold water that can spot leaves. My analysis, oftentimes when you see your ferns dying at home, it is probably because the water you're using is too cold, causing your fern to die off earlier than usual. This is not a robust analysis, of course, but the point that I want to make about this is that this analysis could look very differently had you been talking to maybe a group of high school students or some stay-at-home moms. Again, it is important to, again, consider your audience when thinking about what specifically to share about your major findings. And Ren, I'm going to pass it to them now so that they can talk more about that. Thank you.
And actually, Amaris, before Ren jumps in, because Ren, thank you for that wonderful answer. In the chat, Amaris, could you see Amina's questions in the chat? There were actually two for you there. The first one, I'll feel them. Ooh, it's like a panel. Amaris. Okay, so Mina had a fantastic question. The first being, I think maybe on like slide 2 or 3, you said that we have to be careful about the things that we present, or like we have to think about the ways in which we present information to various groups of people and how that could affect different types of communities. Could you expand a little bit more on that? I think Amina was a little bit confused.
Yeah, so I'm trying to actually think of examples. An example that comes to mind is, let's say a person perhaps from a different ethnic group was presenting to a group of Black students on the racial injustice that happened over the summer, right? And perhaps they said something that was, against the politics and perhaps even offensive. That may have been part of their research. In fact, that may not be their own voice. In that case, it may not be best to share that major findings because now you've just upset and thrown your audience off guard. That's a very drastic example, but that shows that, you want to be careful about thinking about what to share to make sure you're not stepping on anyone's toes, offending anyone, things of that nature. Does that clarify, Amina?
Where, I'm really just confused about the second bullet on this slide. It's just because it's like it didn't support it, so it's like, why are you even talking about it?
Okay, I have an example. So I study international relations at Agnes, but I study public health too. And something we talk about in our research is what happens when the data we find doesn't match up with what the community expected for the data to find. So like, let's say that we were conducting some sort of assessment down here in the Virgin Islands about like the causes of diabetes. I don't know, it's a big issue. And let's say that the local community, because they face like an issue, right, or this issue, they expected the data to find such and such and such. And then the data didn't find that, and the data found something else. Whether obviously we have to present that data because it's like our ethical responsibility to do as researchers. However, the audience probably is not going to like that data. So thinking ahead about how we present that data is super important. So if I showed up, to a local town hall and said, listen, y'all, the data didn't say what y'all thought it did. However, we can still incorporate what you say into the intervention that we will propose later, to address the diabetes that we found, still using our data, but also still actively using like community voice. Because, if we didn't kind of think about how to present that data before, we would have just said, yeah, the data didn't support what you said. And then they would have think, oh, are you calling me incompetent? Are you saying that my lived experiences aren't real? No. There's a much better way for us to still present the data, present our thesis, our research, while still like keeping the community in mind. And I see everybody's shaking their head. So it seems like that kind of helped kind of clarify some things. Amina, let me know.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Okay. And then I think you had another question, not a question, really more so a comment. That sometimes it's very hard to establish credibility in your opinion, just because you're a student, right? And what if the presentations for something that's not in my major? Well, first and foremost, listen, I get it. I completely understand. I think we all deal with, in some essence, trying to figure out what our academic voice is as students, especially when we're surrounded all the time by professors who have PhDs and masters, and we're still trying to just do like our first degree. So I completely understand that. I struggled with that myself, and I still do. I think with us just recognizing that even though we are students, at the end of the day, we still bring something to the table, especially when we've done our research carefully, right? When we've done the research carefully to build our literature review, to say all of this existing data is out there. I've done my research to say that there's a gap missing, and I'm going to come in and step in as like the filler of that gap. Yes, we don't have a degree, but we did the research to show that this is something that's not being accurately addressed within the literature by people who have masters and PhDs and 20 years of experience. And our work at the end of the day is still super valid. Maybe we literally are writing about something that they have yet to think about. So it is a mindset shift. I completely understand that. That's totally fine, but recognize that if we at least do our research and give it its fair due, that we are in fact adding something to the discourse. Yeah. Hopefully that offered something as well. Okay, sweet. Awesome. All right, Ren, I shall now be quiet.
Right. Well, thank you, Amaris, and thank you, Leah, as well. Now that we've talked a little bit about the content of your presentation, I'm going to walk us through some tips for ensuring that you keep your audience interested in what you have to say, because it is important, whether it's for your major or not. So, the most important part of maintaining your audience is making sure that they can keep up with what you're saying. An integral part of this is making really clear connections throughout your presentation. This ensures that your audience isn't confused by your argument and how all the different points within it connect to each other. One helpful way to do this is to make clear references to sources that you've referenced earlier in your presentation. This will ground your evidence and your arguments in a shared base of knowledge that was introduced earlier and ideally towards the beginning of during that little miniature lit review of the speech. You want to make sure that your different sections of your speech are connected. You can do this through your phrasing, through transitions, and persuasive techniques. On page 3 of the worksheet that accompanies this workshop, there's sections for each of these, so feel free to jot down notes or follow along there. So one major way to ensure that your audience is able to keep up with you is repetition of key elements or big ideas. If you ensure that your main points are reiterated throughout your speech, your listeners will know what's important and they'll connect it to your main argument. To help you identify what your big ideas are, take note on what stands out to you as you prepare your presentation. For myself, I really like to draw these big ideas out in kind of a list, and then I build my presentation around these concepts by filling in whatever information is needed to understand those ideas. This also really helps me with pre-speech or during speech anxiety or jitters, because if I have this in my head that these are the main points, I'm less likely to get lost in where I'm at or feel like I'm lost, which for me can be a really big source of anxiety when I'm speaking. So I really like doing that preparation exercise to help me feel like I'm going to be on track throughout the entirety of my presentation. That's just one way to do it. You don't have to take that approach, but it's important to identify what the most critical points of your speech will be. And doing so will help you identify the best phrases for transitions, and will also help you identify how to build upon your research question in the next slides or in the later sections of your speeches. So connecting sections via transitions is an easy way to make sure your audience knows where you're going and how to connect it to your last points. You can use signposts like, now that I've examined the relevant literature, I'd like to explain my methods and how I intend to answer this question a little differently than previous scholars. Or you could transition by saying something like, considering the abundance of public discourse about transgender athletic participation, it's surprising that few science scholars have used a more social lens to discuss disparate experiences between trans and cis athletes. This is where my research intervenes. In these examples, you say something about what came before, you tell your audience what you're going to talk about next, and you explain how those two are connected. Your audience knows what to expect and is ready to move forward with you. A third way that I encourage you to maintain an audience is by utilizing persuasive speech. Essentially, you're answering the so what question. In presentations, because of the format, you really have to work to convince your listener that your work matters. And it does. So as you prepare, I want you to identify ways to connect your work to your audience. Tell us why we should care. Essentially, this just honors how important your work is, and it ensures that you're heard. This might seem difficult, it might seem really abstract, but it boils down to reiterating the relevance of your research to your listeners and offering them the opportunity to connect that to their own lives. This can be done in a few different ways listed on the screen. You can give recommendations for future scholarship. You can offer a set of best practices for your audience, or you can just explain how your research goes beyond previous work to offer new results. There are also some tangible ways and phrases that you can use to keep your audience engaged throughout, known as persuasive techniques. You can use rhetorical questions, which I think Caitlin mentioned a little bit in the introduction. You can use those throughout if it fits the flow and the tone of the speech. You can use pronouns that include your audience. It's going to implicitly clue them in that they should be on your side about this, as you say things like we and us. And you can also use emotive language to keep your audience involved, regardless of the nature of your content. Now, when and how you'll use these techniques will vary depending, again, on the tone, on the style of the speech, but these can be techniques to keep in mind as you're writing. Just remember, on the resource sheet that we shared, there's spaces for each of these important concepts, focusing on your big ideas, using transitions, and persuading your audience. Though your speech preparation doesn't have to follow this exact format, just keep those guidelines in mind to ensure that your audience stays tuned into what you have to say. And like I said, some of these ideas can even be really useful for kind of easing anxiety so that you don't get lost as well. So your audience can stay on board and you can stay on board. Next, Drasana is going to wrap us up talking a little bit about the conclusions.
Okay, thanks, Ren, for walking us through some of those skills to help us maintain an audience. I'm going to be moving forward to discuss the conclusions of a presentation. Firstly, think way back when Amaris was talking about the main points of your research. In your conclusion, you kind of want to remind your audience of those main points by restating them. So you don't just want to copy and paste what you've already written. Instead, try rewording, synthesizing, and combining your main points, because doing this will offer your audience a new way to think about everything that you've covered in your presentation. So if I was going to use this workshop as an example, I would say something like, in this workshop, we discussed creating an engaging introduction and establishing credibility, explored how to locate and analyze major research findings, and reviewed how to maintain an audience. Once you've included that restatement, your conclusion is also a super great spot to connect some of your more noticeable research findings to these points in order to highlight some of the bigger discoveries. So you can think of this as addressing the so what that Amaris and Ren kind of brought up earlier, where you discuss the implications and relevance of your research. Doing this will help tie your work together and leave your audience with a succinct understanding of your entire presentation. And so if I was going to use this workshop again as an example, even though this isn't super research-based, I would say something like utilizing certain skills such as using persuasive speech in order to maintain an audience and making use of a hook when developing an engaging introduction, make it so that you as a presenter are as successful as possible. So in that example, the kind of more noticeable research findings that I was drawing back to were the skills that I highlighted, and then my so what is saying that you would be a super successful presenter by using those skills. But sometimes in our research, there are gaps that either don't fit our scope or that we don't have the time or resources to cover. So therefore, the third thing that you might want to tackle in your conclusion is addressing any future research that might stem from your own, or like Ren and Amaris mentioned, call for further research to fill in the gaps. To do this, you can include a sentence or two addressing any unanswered questions from your research. And so an example that is not from this workshop is, if we cannot combat the ill effects that commercial farming has on our clean water, our freshwater ecosystems, and drinking water supplies will surely diminish. More research and innovation are needed to maintain our clear water while still supporting the agricultural needs of our economy. And so that last sentence is really getting to that further research. So that was a lot, and I said it pretty quickly, so I'm going to do a super quick recap, and this is the perfect time to go back to your worksheet and just jot down any notes that you might have missed. So in your conclusion, you want to, 1, restate, not copy your main points. Try to connect your main points to your research findings and leave your audience with a look at what lies ahead. So I'm going to hand it off to Caitlin, who's going to start our Q&A portion.
Okay, so wow, a lot going on, a lot of layers. We talked about introductions, establishing credibility and why that's so difficult to do, identifying your audience, maintaining your audience, picking the actual things you want to go in your presentation or in your speech, and then how to wrap it up in a way that makes your audience feel empowered to go and do more research on what you've talked about, or just to remember better what it is that we have given them. So that's another recap to Jasana's recap. And now we will go ahead and take questions. If you want to drop those in the chat, we will, I want to go back one slide. That's fine. That is not a problem. Oh, wait. There we go. Yeah, drop your questions in the chat and we will answer them. I wanted to say something in addition to the question about credibility that we got earlier in the workshop. And I was really glad that Ren said it in that part of the presentation, remembering what your scope is. A lot of times, you know, as undergraduate students, we tend to count ourselves out because it's like, oh, I just don't have the breadth of knowledge that's needed to do all of these things. But kind of remembering, you know, your scope. I worked with the materials that I had, and these are the conclusions that I was able to draw from that. And so our pool may not be as big as the person who's working on their PhD, because of course, access looks different. Our level of expertise is different at that point, but being confident in the work that you've done within the scope of your research. So hopefully that kind of helps you to embolden yourself and establish your credibility towards the beginning of that presentation as well. Okay, are there any other questions that we have? Questions.
I also realized I dropped a big blurb in the chat, so I can expand on it while you guys think of any questions you might have. But jumping off of everything that Caitlin just said, which was wonderful, I think one workshop ago, or perhaps two at this point. Yeah, and actually I think this was the first workshop of this semester, entitled Building, College Level Writing Habits. We have like a large portion of that workshop dedicated to finding your academic voice, which is intrinsically tied to establishing one's credibility, right? Because if you feel as though you are, not even you are, but that you have a strong academic voice, you feel like, you have proofread everything, you have checked all of the sentences, you have done your research, you've done all of these things in building your academic voice and finding a way to insert yourself as well as your research into like your work, then intrinsically you begin to establish yourself as a writer. So I dropped the link to that video, that workshop that sits on our YouTube page in the chat, and conversation about establishing one's credibility, finding your academic voice begins at the 24-minute mark. So you can go in and see our beautiful faces again, but from a time in the past. Yeah, okay, I think there's another question in the chat. Okay.
Yes, Amina asked, how can you find the next big thing in your field? It kind of goes back to finding your academic voice, but I feel overwhelmed to find a flaw or make a new discovery in a field that I'm new to. Yeah, this is so important, I think, to really talk about, because there is this pressure in the academic world that we always have to say something new, right? And I get it. You don't want to reinvent the wheel when it's already there. So I can kind of address my thoughts on this question. Feel free to chime in. I'm a history major, which, the next big thing has already happened most of the time because we're talking about the past, right? And there is this emphasis on like revisionist history. What can we pull out of the past that we've never seen before? But sometimes, that's really, really overwhelming and really hard to do in general because there's so much scholarship out there. I think part of this goes back to finding your topic, which is another workshop that we have, topics or thesis statements and topic development. But there are different ways to create new work, right? And one of them is what we call in history a continuity and change over time analysis. So it may not necessarily be that you are looking at what big event changed everything. That's in history, that's what we tend to look for. What are some of the things that just changed the whole way the world works, right? But the first part of that is continuity analysis. Sometimes just seeing, oh, this happened, and then, 20 years later, something very similar happened, and the results are the same. So what are some things that are continuous across a period of time? You see this a lot of time in fashion history, like what kinds of trends are coming back. Those kinds of analyses are really important to acknowledge as well, to see how thought is changing or not really changing that much. So sometimes it's not always about just the next huge thing, but it's looking at some of the little things that are implicit to kind of help you bring those things out and add new meaning to them as you look at them through a different lens. I hope that made sense. On the spot articulation of ideas, which is press part 2. But does anyone else have any other thoughts on this question? How do you find the next big thing and not feel super overwhelmed about having to make a brand new discovery?
I think I have something to add. I think it's really important to, not that there's anything wrong with your question, but it's important to remind yourself that you don't have to find the next big thing to have a valuable contribution to research and to get a good grade on your assignment or to present well at a conference. Like whatever your goal is, you'll find when you speak to academics, their research is something that's really niche and weird, and that's because they did not revolutionize everything. Like we cannot all be, I don't know, I'm gender studies. We can't all be Judith Butler, and that's fine. Like, please, let's not all be Judith Butler. But for real, like, it's really important, I think, when you're thinking about, though, what you want to talk about and how you want to develop an important perspective that's new on whatever that thing is to notice what you notice, which is what we repeat in this committee all the time. And remember that you don't have to be the first person to talk about that. Maybe you're the first person to apply a certain kind of theory to that topic. Maybe you're the first person to consider how that topic impacts XYZ group, or how that topic has been looked at in different ways and what those things are missing. You don't even necessarily have to add something new to the conversation. You can just say people have failed to address this and someone should do that. So maybe something that can be helpful for me, rather than trying to find a brand new topic or a new big thing that nobody else has talked about, is just to look at what people have already said about that and see how I compare that with what I would focus on based on my lived experience, based on my perspective, based on my academic interest. And usually you'll find there a niche that you can fit into, even if you're not an expert in the field.
And there's also power in reiteration, right? There are some things that just don't get emphasized enough. So you could look at one topic and see how someone else applied this lens and say, oh, I don't think we're talking about that enough. And what your project does is reiterates those ideas, but it applies the scale of impact. And sometimes that's what's necessary to really, have ideas make a big punch in the field. Sometimes it takes more than one writer, more than one person to make an idea really, impact the way that we think about a certain subject or topic or group of people. So thank you so much for that question. You got lots of responses there. I hope that was helpful. Yes, and Leah says in the chat, especially in a budding or a new field, saying things again is super helpful and important. Good. I'm glad you found that advice helpful. Any other questions? Awesome. Well, this workshop is being recorded, and we will post this on our CWS YouTube channel, so you can always go back to it, hear the answers to these questions again. I know we talked really quickly because we only have an hour together and we want to be respectful of your time. It's late. We've been on Zoom all day, so we totally understand. So we're going to make this recording available to you, as well as the worksheet that accompanies this workshop available to you. Next week at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we will have part 2 of this press series, and we will talk about specifically how to do presentations without visual aids, or how to answer open-ended questions, or how to really add something really meaningful in a class discussion. How can I articulate my ideas really well on the spot? That's something that a lot of students are like, that part, that's what I really need. I can nail the presentation skills when I have, 80 years to prepare and I can, meticulously go through my slides. But when it comes to the on-the-spot articulation, my anxiety goes wild. So we will really talk about managing that anxiety so that you can clearly articulate your ideas and how to do that in various settings. So we hope you come back and you join us for that workshop. And we also hope that you tell your friends about it. It's a little late in the evening, we understand, but we hope to see you there. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye, everybody.
Bye, y'all.